Welcome back to my channel. That's the Magical Gamsol. It's all of it. You need to go purchase more. I'm gonna do a set of videos where we go through tutorials so that we all can oil paint and be in galleries and make magical works of art. I start off with a palette. I'm not super big on mixing super colors a lot, but that's only because I don't do a lot of skin tones. I have a very distinct color palette that I like to use, which I use basically throughout all of my work. So step one is get all your materials. You're gonna need brushes, you're gonna need paints. I say oil paints because the final product is just the best. You're gonna need a solvent. Some people use linseed oil, some people use Gamsol. Whatever you like, try everything. Today's tutorial is gonna be a rose. Now, roses are just, in my opinion, a bunch of triangles with very almost flat shading. You want to shade to where the highlight is on the outermost part of the petal, just to have the best effect. So you start first with your shape. You get the shape going, which is essentially a bunch of triangles kind of connected, and you start with your base color. So this one I did in multicolor, but your base color usually, let's say it's red. So you're gonna start with the lightest red you possibly can, maybe even mix in some white. And then you go in and you add in your darker values to each petal specifically. For this one, because I've done it 1,000 times, I know a workaround to where I get the colors where I want them. I add in some dark and I add in some white, and then I just blend completely. Typically, I would say use an easel too. That's another one of the things that you will need. Find you something to concentrate on. I always play podcasts when I'm painting just for extra stimulation. So you work your way around the petals. Sometimes it's hard to get lost when they're overlapping, because that is something that you have to do with roses a lot, is overlap the petals, because they kind of open up like a circle. This part, what I'm doing now, is adding some dark values to the purple. Now this part is hard. Once you start to add black, it gets difficult because you can't muddy the painting. So you always have to keep some white handy just to make sure you get the light values. In order to make something look three-dimensional, how I was taught is you really only need 3 values. You need a light, a dark, and then the middle color, basically. So this rose is red, purple, and green. That's just a color scheme that I like. I think I'm getting ready to change the color scheme that I use because I've seen this very strange heat vision that I really like, and it's incorporating orange. We're getting to the point now where it's like I'm adding some of the highlights but not the final highlights. We just want to know where we're going. I like to think about the first part of the painting as a map. So we're getting some colors on the canvas of where the petals are and what color the petals are before we start completely blending them in and shading them. You see how the Gamsol is already kind of dark. Gamsol is the best thing to use, I think, but it's one of those things, like, after you've used so much of it or used it so many times, it is recommended that you change it out for fresh Gamsol. But as you've seen, I was using the last of it for these images. And this part is where it's like I have a very loose painting style. Some people paint very strict. They use really fine, detailed brushes. I'm very much so pick a brush, choose your wand, Harry Potter style, choose your wand, and that's how you're gonna get the image done. Why do I do that? Partially because I'm lazy, and partially because really nice fine brushes typically are expensive, and I just believe that it shouldn't cost you a crazy amount to express yourself. I'm eventually gonna get an insane brush set, but so far it's been working. My favorite part about this is something that add green petals. I just feel like it just gives the painting a different vibe. I actually never completed this image because I was supposed to put like abstract circles and triangles and things on it. I still might later on, but Yeah, I have the hardest time with the center of the rose. The center of the rose, you have to be detailed, and you always have to add black in the center because it has to have a starting point. That's me adding the black to the center of the rose, like an opening. You don't want to do too many hard lines with oil because it'll make it look less realistic and more cartoony. That's something that's more acrylic based artists like to do. So you try to blend a lot more with oil painting. But yeah, painting a rose, it's a lot of triangles, a lot of shading, going back, making sure values match. You want it to look like it's freshly sitting in the garden, just blossomed. I've probably painted over 1,000 roses in my lifetime and do it with my eyes closed at this point. There is one petal on this that I just was having a hard time with because I added too much white. It's on the very far right. Now, when that happens, you typically can just go back, add the color that you want onto it, and it will eventually like itself out. But I went too heavy-handed with the white. At this point in the painting, it's just details and adding highlights where I want highlights at. Roses don't always have to be like perfect. A lot of people do photorealism roses. I feel like the photorealism rose is a bit boring because it just lacks that like touch to it. It's my rendition of a rose. This is how I view roses. This is how I paint them. This is what I want the roses that I put on the wall to look like. And the blending part is always the funnest part. You want them to look flat or almost kind of like pasty, because if you ever look at a rose petal, it typically is one color. It's one solid color. Anything that you're seeing that's not one color on a rose is a shadow, usually. It's like you can makeshift your own shadows while you're doing this. White paint is the most valuable paint because that's where you're going to get all of your light details at. So always just get an extra tube of white paint, always get an extra white marker, just always have extra whites laying around because those are always the first ones to go. That's always the thing that I need to go back to the art store for. Then in Gamsol, of course, I'm getting in there now and adding like shadows of where you wouldn't see petal color at. You would just see like dark spots of the rose where it's like this part is being covered by the previous, or this part is being covered by this petal. It's one of the more simpler things to paint or draw. I used to struggle with them because I didn't understand how they were triangles with curves, but it's really how you really get like a good flowery image out of them. I can't tell if it's my favorite thing to paint or is it just like I'm on autopilot. It's just a part of me now. I always like to do with roses like big center petal, and that's just so that the petal where you can add as much detail as you'd like. And I think this is the finish. Yeah, and this is the last of it. Like, comment, and subscribe. This is one of my, I would say, less conceptual roses. Yeah, come see me on the next one. Subscribe.